Let's talk supply chain. So welcome to the show, Patrick.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. Finally, after a long stint of a couple of years now, you've invited me, and so I'm finally on board here. Thank you.
I am so excited to have you here. Like you said, this has been a long time coming. You've been working on this company for a little while now,
Yes.
and I've been excited about it since the moment that you told me. And now that we are actually doing this episode, it's like a full circle moment for me. Plus, I get to share your journey. I get to share your story. I get to share everything about your company with our community. And so really, really excited to do that. And you are really helping to tackle the many issues that we're having with containers. I mean, it's not something we talk about that often, really, but as the last few years have shown, the impact of available containers at ports can have is so big. So I'm excited to put that and yourself and the company in the spotlight today. So let's start with you because your background is fascinating. Give us an overview of your journey and how and why you founded Trakking.
So my background is actually in logistics for the last 25 years, with a forwarding company, a warehousing company, trucking company. So I know a lot about sort of logistics, and so it's a bit of a change in 2019 when I want to get into tech because I know nothing about writing code. I know nothing about Python, so it's a bit of a shift. But I've realized that a lot of that um, experience that I've had in the past really has helped me understand really what the problem is, where the bottlenecks are from the
Mm-hmm.
ground up. And so that has given me a lot of knowledge in terms of figuring out how to apply tech into a specific problem on the container side.
Well, and we need more of that, I think, in tech for supply chain, really hands on experience of what you've seen in the industry and how that's actually affected yourself, affected clients, and how do we solve for that, right? And so
Yeah.
you've touched on the challenges and some of the bottlenecks you were seeing, but what about now? Because I think the landscape of the industry has changed a lot in 5 years with the pandemic just blowing things wide open. What do those challenges look like now as we're heading towards the second half of 2023?
Yeah, so things have definitely changed in terms of landscape. It's obviously we are not in the same predicament as we were, but we're seeing some of the aftermath effects. So, for example, here, and I'm talking about Canada, not North America. In Canada, we've of course had a bit of a slowdown, and there's been a lot of over inventory on the East Coast in Toronto.
Hmm.
A lot of containers, empty containers, haven't been able to return them back to the rail depots because of the over inventory. And so truckers are finding it difficult when they have to wait a few hours to return their empties. And so our one of our platforms, one of our modules is giving that visibility to the trucking companies to see when they can return those empties back to the depot or back to the rail without them waiting 2 hours, 3 hours
Yeah,
for
because
return.
that 2 to 3 hours could be another load for them, right?
Absolutely,
Another
absolutely.
paid delivery that
Yes,
they could have more money in their pocket.
yes,
Instead, they're standing around waiting to be able to deliver empties. And that is not conducive to anybody. I mean,
right.
no wonder we have some disgruntled truckers,
Yes.
right? And so we
I mean,
need to solve for that.
I think that oftentimes we've made an assumption that truckers or the trucking community, part of their job is waiting.
Right.
But I think that assumption is wrong because obviously waiting means time and time means money. And of course, that
Mm-hmm.
comes with, fuel consumption, CO2 emissions, and all of that stuff, right? So obviously trying to change that narrative
Yeah.
in the sense that how do we make it more efficient, really for the guys that's pulling the containers. And so, of course, there's a lot of talk about fluidity and dead runs and things like that. So I think what our platform is trying to do is really solve those basic efficiencies,
Mm-hmm.
not rocket science, but just trying to provide visibility to the users of the containers.
Well, and change the narrative. I mean, it's companies like yours that are also going to support that community to be able to change that narrative and show what optimization can actually look like. So, talk to me about tracking. Talk to me about what exactly it is that you do and how you help your customers.
So Trakking is a online platform, and we've got three different modules. The modules are independent, but really in our next enhancement, it's all about connecting those modules. So the first module is street turns, which a lot of companies talk about, or matchbacks.
So, explain a street turn or a matchback to me, just in
Yeah.
case I don't know.
So Sarah, thank you. So what a street turn is that when a trucking company has an import load
Mm-hmm.
and delivers the product to their customer, instead of the container returning back to a depot or a rail or a terminal, that container can be reused for an export load. And therefore, the benefit for the cargo owner or the trucking company is, of course, they could reuse that container and save one leg, save cost, avoid the gate in, gate out charges, which the shipping line love, and of course, decrease the CO2 emissions. So
Right.
that's the street turn definition.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I just had to
Yeah.
pause you there just for some acronyms because some people may or may not know, or they might actually call it something different.
That's a great reminder, and I have to often remind myself not to sort of take it for granted that I use some of these terminologies that perhaps people might not be aware of.
Because you and I have been in the industry so long that they
Too
just
long,
roll
too
off
long.
the tongue.
Exactly.
So, what's
Right.
the second module?
So the second module is an empty release module. So what that is that, for a lot of exporters, for the last 25 years, they might make a booking, and the normal process is that they have to call or email, or perhaps some have to fax to a shipping line to get and obtain an empty container. So that process is obviously very tedious, very labor intensive, a lot of paperwork involved. And so we've digitized that process now on our platform, where a trucking company or a BCO or NVO can go onto the platform with their existing booking, request the empty container from that specific shipping line, and get that done in a matter of seconds
Huh,
instead of hours.
right.
So that's the second module.
Amazing. And I think you have a third one?
So the third one is the opposite. So it's the empty return module.
Okay.
So rather than going onto each individual shipping line's website, again, you can go to our platform, register your container, figure out where you want to return the container, depending on your convenience, the time, and have the certainty that when you return that empty, you're not going to be refused at the gate. So that's the empty return module.
So much savings in amount of like time and hours, like we were talking about before. It
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. And it might not make, a huge difference necessarily to one person in the supply chain, but it makes a difference for a variety of other people that we need to consider if we're all going to work together. So I'm so glad we're talking about this because it's definitely something that's needed in the industry. Now, before we go any further, though, I want to understand who your ideal client is. Like if I'm sitting in the audience and I'm really liking what I'm hearing in this episode, who do I need to be or what do I need to look like to be a client of Trakking?
So that's an interesting question, Sarah, because I would say that the client actually comes in different buckets.
Okay.
So I would say one part of our client is our digital partner, which is the shipping lines.
Mm-hmm.
Without the shipping lines, there's no platform because they
Right.
of course have to share that data. The second obvious customer are the trucking or the drayage companies. They're the
Mm-hmm.
ones that pull in the container, and they are of course are the ones that of course see the savings immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But they of course aren't the cargo owners, and so some of those savings are passed on back to the NVO, or the BCO, or the beneficial cargo owner. So all four of them are the customer of that platform, directly or indirectly. But then, of course, we could look at the terminals or the depots.
Mm-hmm.
because they might not have the direct benefit immediately. But of course, if they have more certainty of when containers are returned or when containers are picked up, obviously they're going to have more fluidity at the gate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we've recognized is that, like you said earlier, so much of the supply chain is linked together,
Mm-hmm.
um, that all those stakeholders and the players are all interlinked,
Right.
and the benefits hopefully will have, across the board, not just for one specific stakeholder.
Well, and lasting effects and impacts, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later as far as sustainability. But I want to dive back into those three modules. Now, the empty container release module, do you have any examples or some stats that you can share for how the platform has delivered for a customer?
Yes, so what we've launched our platform in August. We've done probably over 13,000 transactions since
Mhm.
August. We've had two out of 13,000 that were quote unquote dead runs. So, in other words, 99.99% when truckers go onto our platform and request an empty,
Mhm.
they are almost guaranteed that they will get that empty container at
Wow.
the location with the shipping line that they choose.
Mhm.
And so with that, of course, it's only a short period of time. With that data, um, yeah, I feel confident that, as I talk with different trucking companies, they don't have to fear that, they're going to dispatch a truck, wait at the gate or the terminal or at the rail and figure out, do I need to wait an hour, 2 hours?
Yeah.
It's easy for them. Now, of course, there could be traffic that I can't control. Um,
Come on, Patrick.
I try to, but no, it's not within my power to do that. But I think what we can control, of course, is certainty in terms of what that container, where it is, and who is it
Mhm.
for that specific booking.
And as far as like industry benchmarking, what does it look like without tracking? Like how disjointed is that process?
That's a good question. There's not a lot of industry benchmark or stats or KPIs, but just inferring from talking to
Mhm.
different trucking companies, that percentage was probably between 5 to 8% in terms of dead runs.
Wow.
So out of 100 containers, trucking company says, 5 to 8 times I've had to be turned away, or I have to wait for a couple of hours and realize there's no empty containers there. So if we brought that 5 to 8% down to, as I said,
Point two.
0.001%. Now, of course, it's not a metric that I'm holding on firmly because we haven't onboarded all the shipping lines, but it's at least a good reference point for us to
Mm-hmm.
look at aiming and targeting and really giving that confidence to the community and to the ecosystem of container moves.
Absolutely. Now talk to me about the street turns module. What kind of examples and stats do you have for that one, like you just gave us for the empty container release?
So the street turn is a bit more straightforward. We've launched that a few years ago. We've done probably over 20,000 transactions. Um, all the transactions have been fulfilled, meaning that basically, as long as it's not a container that's off hire from the
Mm-hmm.
shipping line,
Mm-hmm.
all of the containers can be reused as an export load. And so the immediate benefit, of course, for the trucking company or the potentially for the cargo owner is again quick turnaround for the container,
Mm-hmm.
savings in terms of that leg, and then third, of course, decrease in terms of carbon emissions. Um, so that's a very straightforward win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. And then do your like the other module that we were talking about, which is the empty containers that are being returned, right? Because we already talked about the empty container release, but the
Yes.
empty container return, are you seeing the same kind of numbers and the same kind of stats with that particular model that you are with the release?
So the empty return, the volume is not as as large as the other two modules because
Hmm.
we launched in Toronto as of January the 3rd of this year.
Okay.
So it's a smaller quantity, but in terms of the results, I would say it's again 99.99% that when the trucker applies for the empty return,
Hmm.
he doesn't have to be turned away at the gate. In fact, actually, on our platform, we show the quantity um, that is available to be returned at that specific depot. So whether it's 100, whether it's 300, the trucker knows, you know what, I'm the
Oh.
299th container being returned, and there's only one slot left. So that gives a lot of confidence again, really,
Hmm.
to the dispatcher, to the driver,
Hmm.
and of course with the NVO, um, they don't, of course, have to pay for detention or demurrage, knowing that if they go through our platform, that container is returned at Depot A or Depot B or where have you.
So that is a really great point. And I was going to ask you about that because now you're providing the data. You're
Yes,
providing the visibility of, okay, well, if I went in on June 3rd and I was 299 and there was only one slot left and I had to wait for 10 hours to be told to turn around and come back tomorrow,
yes,
versus I get an appointment on June 4th to take it back and they charge you, right, for
yes,
detention or demurrage potentially between June 3rd and June 4th. You can
yes.
go back with the data and say, listen, I would have tried on the 3rd, but there was no openings. I went in on the 4th. I shouldn't be charged for that day.
I think part of that, sharing of that visibility is to give confidence and to give
Yeah.
actually real data,
Mhm.
to the people returning the containers and saying that, look, you have choice.
Yeah.
Now, going onto a platform, there's a cost. It's not like it's free.
Right.
But I think part of it is to give truckers the availability and saying, look, you don't have to use our platform. You can wait. If you've got 5 free days, you can wait. You don't need to go through our platform. But at least it's a choice, it's a backup, you
Yeah.
know, for truckers. And I think that's what truckers want because
Hmm.
the container sitting on their chassis, they make money in terms of turns. And the last
Yeah.
thing they want is for the empty container to be sitting on the chassis for 3 days.
Hmm.
But with the different modules like the street turn, they have the option of returning the container,
Hmm.
or if they find a load that's for export, they can reuse it as well, right? And so it's trying to give more and more opportunities where the box could be turned, returned, or to be reused.
Absolutely. And I love all of that because at the end of the day, it's data that's going to bring us all together, right? As
Yes,
long as we're using it in the right ways and for
yes,
the right end result that
yes,
everybody is looking for. And those
yes.
end results are optimization, right? They're like,
Right.
how do we make sure that everybody along the line is not getting frustrated? Everybody's making money,
Yep, yep. And
right?
and and Sarah, you've brought, a lot of sort of good points, the word efficiency and optimization and digitization. And I think those are buzzwords that has been used quite a bit in our
Mm-hmm.
industry in the last few years, and those are great things to strive for. I think because of my background coming from really grassroots and from the bottoms up, it's really trying to apply it very practically for the different stakeholder groups and saying, okay, I can talk about digitization, but what does it mean to your pocket?
Yeah,
What
exactly.
does it mean to your time? And
Yeah.
so by translating some of that into actual dollars and cents, I think it gains a lot of adoption. Hopefully, that's what I'm trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
Adoption, not just with one group, but other groups, because part of it is really an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because I'm only solving one problem. How do I look at then have APIs with other software companies, whether it's a TMS or another system where we can have that integration and everybody wins,
Mm-hmm.
but everybody has a choice if they want to pay for or not pay for it. So
Yeah.
I like having choices, and I think part of it is, coming from a logistics background, having scenarios and having options.
Absolutely. So you touched on it a little bit, but what is the impact of these kinds of services? How do you see it solving big challenges that we're seeing in the industry and start to reshape what the industry looks like? Because I really feel like tracking is going to be that platform, that software that's able to reshape some of what we have said is always been done.
I think at least here in Canada, Sarah, and I can only speak about Canada just
Mhm.
simply because it's launched here in Canada. I think that the first thing, it really starts creating opportunities for different groups to have communication.
Mhm.
You talked about data and visibility. That's a very sensitive subject, right? Who wants to share, who wants to share data?
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to create those opportunities for communication, and that way it creates hopefully groups that can find solutions to those problems. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that I'm trying to create an ecosystem where it's not just tracking as one platform. It's an ecosystem where other software technology companies or other competitors can come in and say, look, we have this, you have that. How do we look at working together?
Mhm.
Um, we're having digital partnerships with other tech companies outside of Canada because our philosophy is I don't want to spend money building something that I can find elsewhere.
Right.
I want to look at partnering, having a licensing of some sort agreement, and then providing that cumulative effect in terms of doing that. So I would say that's number two.
Mhm.
And then I think the third thing, of course, is it changes behavior. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you have to pay for a service, you think twice about using that.
Mhm.
And so by changing behavior, hopefully we don't take it for granted that, you know what, empty containers, they're supposed to be for free. Well, yes and no. It's for free because it's been a standard, but
Right.
there's a cost that maybe you don't see today that somebody else is bearing the cost. So those are the three things that I see, Sarah, in terms of how to augment that solution for Canada and for the logistics.
Yeah, and also perspective. I think you spoke about this at the top of our conversation, is really changing the perspective around the fact that no, truck drivers are not about waiting. Like
Yes,
that part of the industry is not about waiting.
right.
That part of the industry needs to be optimized so that
Yes,
everybody wins. And that's
yes.
what I really like. Now, I alluded to it before, sustainability,
Yeah.
and that is another huge impact, right? Because ports, shippers, carriers, they're all tasked with different but equally ambitious ESG goals. And there's a lot of worry about how exactly they're going to achieve them. So talk to us about how tracking is helping to reduce carbon emissions and how can organizations leverage your technology to meet their own ESG goals?
So on our platform, on the very first page, at sort of this very bottom, we show the CO2 emissions saved in each of our modules and then the total amount. What we assume is that, of course, on the street turn module, by saving one leg, there's going to be obviously savings in terms of the CO2 used from the gasoline
Mm-hmm.
that's being saved. Then from the empty release and empty return module, we've had to average in terms of the waiting time. And most trucking companies have told us, on average, we have to wait in terms of a turnaround 1 to 2 hours in terms of
Mm,
at different locations. Now, if you add up 2 hours times the 10,000 transactions or 30,000 transactions we've had, imagine how much we've saved already. But I think what we try to do is also be very pragmatic, Sarah,
mm-hmm.
because I'm only playing a very small part in terms of the whole CO2 emission. I think, again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I hope that it creates dialogue in terms of with our customers, with their customers, and going, how does everybody within the ecosystem play a small part?
Yeah.
Because it's not just the shipping lines, it's not just the LNGs in terms of their replacement of the vessels. Well, that's a significant part, But how about the small pieces? How do we put all of those pieces together in terms of helping the better environment for all of us?
And that's supply chain is the biggest puzzle of them all,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I
And
like
hopefully
how
we'll
you use
solve it
that.
before we retire, Sarah.
You think?
Hopefully,
Maybe.
hopefully. Yeah,
I mean, with everything moving so quickly, I mean, you never know, right?
exactly.
So one of the questions that I get asked all the time when I'm talking to technology providers, platforms like yours, what does integration and onboarding look like, right? What can customers expect in terms of timeframes, IT resources, things like that? Because when we're looking at new technologies, it's one of the biggest questions on everybody's mind.
Yes, yes. I think the biggest point in terms of the onboarding is again the trust factor
Hmm.
and the time factor, because there's no one technology that's going to solve everything. It's not a click of a button.
Right.
Every time that we onboard, whether it's a digital partnership with a shipping line, or whether it's a trucking company, or whether it's a depot, um, they have their own legacy system. They have different things that we have to remap, and it takes time, it takes effort, it takes, a lot of openness. So I would say that onboarding phase one obviously is having that understanding of what that commitment of time, what that commitment in terms of onboarding. Now, for some companies, it's easy. Some
Yep.
trucking companies are very tech savvy.
Hmm.
Others perhaps might not be. And so for those that aren't, we would provide also solutions in terms of what makes sense for them. Um, so I would say one is, of course, the trust and the time factor. Number two is I always like, even though we're on this Zoom call, I always like the face to face,
Hmm.
sitting down with the customer face to face, seeing where they're at, seeing how they're operating, the team that they have, because I think that tells a lot. And so we want to walk alongside one company, one trucking company, one shipping line at a time.
Hmm.
I'm not in a rush, partly because I understand the industry that we're in. It takes time to change. And so part of that is really not um, applying some of the tech expectations to our industry.
Mm.
Walking alongside is very important, I find. So those are
Yeah.
the two things I've seen.
Awesome. And so for your platform specifically, is it a plug and play or does it take, you know, a little bit of time for onboarding?
I would say on the digital partnership with the shipping lines, it's very much a plug and play.
Hmm.
For the trucking companies, if they wanted to integrate to their TMS system,
Ah,
it depends on
right.
what the TMS system capability is.
Hmm.
If they just want to use the online platform, they can use it. It's very easy to do.
Awesome. Okay, I'm glad that you shared that. Now, I want to have a little bit of fun with you right now, and I'd
Sure.
like you to get
Sure.
your crystal ball out.
Okay.
Do you think that self-driving containers are the future of transportation? Now, we've talked about self-driving trucks, and maybe
Right.
that's part of the conversation here. But I just read that we have the world's first self-driving ferry that launched in Sweden. So I
Right.
want to get your take on this and what you think the future of transportation looks like.
Well, I think the technology of self-driving trucks, it's very much in the near future, very short time in the next 3 to 5 years. The challenge isn't so much about the technology. I would say the challenge is in the infrastructure.
Mm.
So when you look at, say, Singapore, I know that they've been testing specific dedicated lanes for self-driving trucks, or for terminals where it's a confined area
Mm-hmm.
where you can have trucks moving containers around the terminals.
Okay.
Those scenarios make sense. But when it comes to sharing a highway with a passenger vehicle with a family of four, I see that as some challenges until that infrastructure is in place where you might have a specific barrier. But then I think that involves obviously government, involves communication with the Department of Transport. Those pieces will take a long time in terms of getting some of that in place in the near future.
Or maybe we'll just go all Jetson and passenger vehicles will be in the sky
Exactly.
and autonomous vehicles will be on the road.
That's right. That's right. I have put my name down for a company that's based in UK, where it's actually a Back to the Future car where you can be in the air for 30 minutes. So I did put my name down for the waiting list for that.
How long is the waiting list and how long do we have to wait for that video, Patrick?
I think it's going to be 2.5, 3 years. That's what I was told.
Okay. But you're going to take the video and send it over to me so I can.
That's right. No, I'm going to drive it there. I'll drive it to Toronto.
I love that. All right. So finally, then, what does the future hold for tracking and for the industry over the coming year?
I think for us, it's just onboarding more digital partnership with shipping lines. That's number one. And then second of all, the Port of Vancouver has talked about a port community system. And this is something that I've completely support in terms of what Canada can look like as government-led initiative, and having companies like myself being part of that spoke in connecting to that port community system. So I see ourselves expanding into more functionality in terms of the day-to-day operations and feeding that to a port community system in the future, where then across the board, across the country, you could see that data depending on what you want to see.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I cannot wait to watch your growth and see what you do and the impact that you make in the industry. A look at recent headlines show that Canadian and US ports are still in rough waters. Widespread strikes are halting operations at the same time that multi-million-dollar infrastructure investments are being announced. It's clearly a time of disruption and change. So now more than ever, it's vital that you ensure you have the right partners and processes in place to help guide you through. And if you're dealing with containers, you need Trakking. Trakking connects terminals, shipping lines, container depots, drayage companies, and import-export groups across North America, allowing all drayage companies to easily source, manage, and return containers quickly and easily. And in this climate, that is priceless. If you want to find out more, you can check them out at Trakking. That's Trakking.com. A massive thanks to Patrick for joining me and to the team at Trakking for making this episode happen. Patrick, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me. Thank you.